I thought signing the divorce papers marked the end, but then I watched my mother hold my replacement's hand like she was her own flesh and blood. A notification lit up my ex-husband's phone at 9:30 sharp, instructing him to make sure I signed first. That was the moment I realized they were not just replacing me in the family portrait. They were swapping me into a criminal record. My name is Kara Whitman. At 37 years old, I was smart enough to know that a peace dinner held 48 hours after a final divorce decree usually meant someone wanted to assuage their guilt. I adjusted my silk blouse in the reflection of the brass-framed doors of the Brass and Ash, one of Nashville's most pretentious steakhouses. I expected a quiet table in the back, perhaps with my parents and Grant acting somber but civil. I walked inside and the air conditioning hit me like a physical slap, but it was the scene at table 4 that froze my blood. This was not a family dinner. It looked like a hostile takeover disguised as a social gathering. Grant Mercer sat at the head of the table. He did not look like a man mourning the end of a 10-year marriage. He looked like a CEO closing a deal. His suit was pressed to military precision, his hair styled without a single strand out of place. Surrounding him were 3 men I recognized as junior partners from his firm, men who had never attended a single birthday party or anniversary dinner in our entire relationship. They were witnesses. I felt a knot of nausea tighten in my stomach. Kara. There she is, Grant announced, his voice booming with a false warmth that made my skin crawl. Come, sit. Everyone has been waiting for the guest of honor. He used that tone, the one he reserved for clients he intended to bleed dry. I moved toward the table, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the polished floor. That was when the second blow landed. My mother was there. She was not sitting with a reserved distance. She was standing next to a young woman named Sloane Parker. I knew Sloane. She was 24, an intern at the firm who always seemed to be in the background of Grant's video calls. But right now, my mother was holding Sloane's hands. She leaned in and kissed the girl's cheek with a familiarity that took the air right out of my lungs. It was the kind of affection she had not shown me in years. "Mom," I said, my voice barely holding steady. She flinched. My father, sitting next to her, suddenly found the pattern of the tablecloth fascinating. He refused to meet my eyes. "Kara, honey," my mother said, her smile tight and terrifyingly bright. "Sloane was just telling us about her charity work. She is such a delight." "Sit down, Kara Bear," Grant interrupted, using a nickname I had asked him to retire 5 years ago. He did it on purpose. It was a power move to shrink me down, to frame me as the relic of his past in front of his new future. Let's not make a scene. We are all adults here. I took the empty seat opposite him. A waiter immediately materialized, pouring a heavy glass of Cabernet without asking. The liquid swirled dark and ominous in the glass. Before I could even unfold my napkin, Grant slid a thick, black leather envelope across the white tablecloth. It stopped inches from my plate. "Just a few final formalities," Grant said, his smile not reaching his shark-like eyes. "Post-divorce housekeeping. You know how the lawyers get. I figured we could get the boring stuff out of the way before the appetizers arrive. Just sign them so we can all move on." "I thought we signed everything at the courthouse," I said, my hand not moving toward the folder. "Compliance updates, tax restructuring for the previous joint filing year." He dismissed smoothly. "Nothing you need to worry your pretty head about." His phone, resting face up on the table next to his wine glass, buzzed. The screen lit up for 3 seconds. The font was large enough for me to read it clearly from across the table. 9:30. Make sure she signs first. Grant snatched the phone and flipped it over, but the damage was done. I glanced at my watch. It was 9:28. "Drink up, Kara," one of the junior partners urged, lifting his glass. "To new beginnings." "Yes, drink," my mother chimed in, her voice shrill. "You look so tense. Darling, relax." They were pushing the alcohol. They wanted me pliable. They wanted me barely reading the fine print. I looked around the table. my father's shame, my mother's betrayal, Grant's predatory focus, Sloane's smug silence. This was not a dinner. I touched the cold leather of the folder but did not open it. My analyst brain, the part of me that had saved Grant's company from bankruptcy years ago, snapped into high gear. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile that felt like glass in my mouth. "To new beginnings." I lifted the glass to my lips but did not drink. I let the aroma of the wine mask the sharp intake of breath I needed to steady my heart. They thought I was the broken ex-wife walking into a consolation prize. They had no idea I had just realized I was the target of a meticulously planned execution. I stared at the black leather folder, and the noise of the restaurant faded into a dull hum. My mind, trained to dissect balance sheets and spot fiscal hemorrhages, began to rewind the tape of the last year. It was a habit I could not break. Before I was Grant Mercer's wife, I was Kara Whitman, the senior financial analyst who had pulled Mercer Dominion Holdings back from the brink of a complete default. I was the one who sat up for 3 nights straight, restructuring their toxic debt into something survivable. I saved their family legacy. When Grant put a ring on my finger, the narrative shifted. I was politely ushered out of the boardroom and into the role of the supportive spouse. Yet, the work never stopped. I became the consultant they called at midnight, the unpaid fixer who solved problems their overpriced executives could not handle. I had no official title, no salary, and no voting rights. I thought I was being a good partner. Now, looking at the expectant faces around the table, I realized I had been a volunteer scapegoat. The pattern had started 6 months ago. It was subtle, like a hairline fracture in a dam. My inbox began receiving carbon copies of email chains I had never initiated. The subject lines were always vague, regarding supply chain logistics or vendor payments, but the content was damning. Phrases like "proceeding as per Kara's recommendation" or "implementing Mrs. Mercer's strategy" appeared in threads discussing high-risk transfers. "Grant," I had asked him one evening in our kitchen, holding my phone up, "why is operations citing me on this vendor switch I never told them to drop the old supplier?" He had laughed, pouring himself a scotch, and kissed my forehead. "Don't be so modest, babe. You mentioned over dinner that their rates were high. The team just respects your input. Take the compliment." I had taken the compliment. I was starving for validation, so I swallowed the lie. I did not see it for what it was. It was a paper trail. They were painstakingly pasting my name onto decisions that were now likely hemorrhaging money. I looked across the table at my mother. Her eyes darted away from mine, fixing on the breadbasket. Her betrayal cut deeper than Grant's because hers was bought and paid for. After my father's hardware business went under last year, Grant had stepped in with a generous personal loan to bail them out. I remembered the change in her demeanor almost immediately. She stopped asking if I was happy and started asking if I was keeping Grant happy. The debt was a leash, and Grant held the handle. You are overthinking it, Kara," Grant had said countless times over the last year whenever I questioned his late nights. He would come home smelling of a perfume that was not mine sandalwood and vanilla, the same scent Sloane Parker was wearing right now, and when I confronted him, he would twist reality. "You are being sensitive," he would say, shaking his head with pity. "It is just business. You are getting paranoid stuck in this house. Maybe you need to see a therapist." He had made me doubt my own sanity so he could steal my life. I thought about the joint account. For months, I had noticed small, irregular withdrawals. $200 here, $500 there. Amounts too small to trigger a fraud alert, but consistent enough to establish a pattern of reckless spending or untraceable cash flow if anyone looked closely. I had flagged it once. "Just incidental expenses. Kara," Grant had said. "Stop micromanaging every penny. It is unbecoming." Then there were the login alerts. 3 times in the last month, I received notifications that my personal secure ID was being used to access the Mercer Dominion mainframe at 3 in the morning when I called the IT department. They brushed it off. Just a system glitch, Mrs. Mercer, the head of IT had told me. The server sometimes pings authorized users during updates. Ignore it. I had ignored it. I trusted the system. I looked at the folder again. This was not a tax document. This was the harvest. They had spent 6 months planting evidence, creating a digital ghost of me that made reckless decisions, authorized bad transfers, and moved money around. They did not just want to be divorced from me. They needed someone to take the fall for whatever financial rot was about to collapse Mercer Dominion. Kara, Grant's voice broke through my thoughts. The pen is right there. He was not looking at me with love, or even with the pity one has for an ex-lover. He was looking at me like I was a liability he was about to write off. I know, I said softly. I was just thinking about how much you have done for my family. We take care of our own, my mother blurted out, her voice trembling. Yes, I replied, my eyes locking onto Grant's. You certainly do. They wanted a signature to seal the trap. They wanted me to sign first, so the transfer of guilt was absolute before the clock struck 9:30. I realized then that I was not fighting for my share of the marital assets. I was fighting for my freedom. I flipped the cover of the leather folder. The paper inside was heavy, cream-colored, and dense with legal syntax. The header read Post-Dissolution Asset and Liability Allocation. It looked like a tax document from a distance. Up close, it looked like a prison sentence. I scanned the first page. It was a non-disclosure agreement. The terms were draconian. It demanded 10 years of absolute silence regarding any and all operational details of Mercer Dominion Holdings. It carried a penalty of $5 million per violation. They were not asking for discretion. They were buying my tongue. I turned to page 2, a non-compete clause. It listed specific prohibitions against practicing financial analysis or corporate consulting. The geographic restrictions included New York, Tennessee, Illinois, and California. They were not just divorcing me. They were ensuring I could never work in this industry again. They wanted to erase my career. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hand remained steady as I turned to page 3. The heading changed. Acknowledgement of oversight. The text was a wall of transaction codes. MDH Logistics Alpha. Vendor Pay Run 6. CapEx Approval B. I recognized these codes. They were from the logistics expansion project that had gone over budget last year. I had flagged those accounts as high risk months ago. I had recommended freezing them. Now, they were printed here in black and white under a section titled Direct Supervisory Responsibility. Then I saw the appendix. It was a single paragraph at the bottom, right above the signature line. I, Kara Whitman, hereby confirm that I have personally reviewed and approved all vendor payments and allocation transfers for the preceding 2 quarters. It was a confession. They were asking me to retroactively take credit for 6 months of financial bleeding. If I signed this, I was not just agreeing to a divorce settlement. I was admitting to embezzlement, negligence, or fraud. Kara, Grant whispered, leaning in close. His breath smelled of expensive scotch. I know it looks complex, but look at Clause 5. There is a private fund for you. It is off the books. Enough to keep you comfortable for a long time. I looked at Clause 5. It mentioned discretionary spousal support subject to compliance. There was no dollar amount. There was no account number. It was a ghost promise. Just sign it, Kara, my mother said. Her voice was brittle. She refused to look at the paperwork. Do not be difficult. Think of it as a way to pay back the family for everything we have done. She meant everything Grant had done for them. She was selling me to keep her house. A waiter moved to refill the water glasses. He hesitated near Sloane Parker, one of the junior partners. A man named Davis, who I had known for years, leaned toward her. Does the proxy require anything else? Davis asked her. I froze. The proxy. That was not a nickname for an intern. That was the internal Mercer code for a voting member of the board who held shares for a silent partner. Sloane was not just a mistress. She was on the payroll. She was part of the governance structure. She had been in the room the whole time. I looked up. Grant was tapping his finger on the table. Tap, tap, tap. I need 15 minutes, I said. Grant stopped tapping. What? I am a licensed analyst, I said, keeping my voice level. I cannot sign a document referencing financial oversight without verifying the transaction codes. It is a matter of professional ethics. I need 15 minutes to read the fine print. We do not have 15 minutes, Grant snapped. His cool facade cracked. He glanced at his Rolex. It is just a formality. Kara, the junior partner insisted. The notary is waiting in the lobby. If it is just a formality, then 15 minutes will not change anything, I countered. We are already past the 9:30 mark. Victor Mercer barked from the end of the table. The table went silent. Victor's eyes widened. He realized what he had said. He quickly cleared his throat. We are late for the celebration toast, Victor corrected, his voice straining for casualness. He had confirmed it. The text message was real. Make sure she signs first. 9:30 was not a dinner reservation. It was a deadline. Something was happening in the system at 9:30, and they needed my signature on this document before that digital clock ticked over. I looked at the pen Grant was pushing toward me. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy, black. It looked less like a writing instrument and more like the trigger of a gun they wanted me to point at my own head. 15 minutes, I repeated, or I walk out. I walked toward the restrooms but bypassed the door, stopping instead in the service corridor near the emergency exit. I looked up. A black dome camera blinked with a steady red light. I positioned myself directly beneath it. If anything happened to me tonight, I wanted the footage to be high definition. I was not panicking. I was calculating. Panic is a luxury for people who do not know they are being hunted. I pulled my phone out and dialed Elena Reyes. Elena was a forensic accountant and a shark of a lawyer who had almost taken down the Mercer Empire 5 years ago in a shareholder dispute. She was the only person Grant feared. Kara, Elena answered on the second ring, her voice sharp. Why are you calling me? They handed me a retroactive oversight acknowledgement, I said, keeping my voice low but distinct. They want me to sign it now, at a dinner party. Do not sign it, Elena ordered, her tone shifting from surprised to commanding instantly. Do not put ink on that paper. Listen to me. If they are pressing you for time, it means the fraud is already in motion. You need to create a chain of custody for your refusal. Right now. I slipped the appendix into my purse, I said. Photograph it, Elena said. Use the encrypted Signal app. I need the metadata. I need proof you saw it at 9:35. I checked my watch. I laid the paper against the wall, using my body to shield it from the view of a passing waiter. I snapped a photo of the transaction codes. I focused on the section listing the vendor payments for the last 2 quarters. I hit send. The little check mark appeared. That image now existed on a server Grant could not touch. Now, draft an email. Elena continued. Subject line statement of non-consent. Send it to yourself, to me, and to a secure backup. State clearly that you are being pressured to sign documents you have not reviewed under duress. My thumbs flew across the screen. Kara Whitman, am currently at the Brass and Ash. I have been presented with a liability allocation agreement by Grant Mercer and am being coerced to sign without legal counsel. I do not consent to these terms. Sent. Alibis, Elena said. Kara, if they put your name on transactions, they used your credentials. Verify your location against the timestamps. I switched apps. I opened my health data. I scrolled back to the dates listed on the paper. October 14th. The document claimed I authorized a wire transfer at 2 in the morning. I pulled up my sleep tracker data. At 2 in the morning on October 14th, my heart rate was 50 beats per minute. I was in deep REM sleep. I have biological proof I was asleep during the transfers, I said. Good. Now check the system logs. Do you still have access? I think so. I opened the Mercer Dominion employee portal. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I navigated to the security tab. I found the login history. There it was. User K. Whitman. Login October 14th, 212 a.m. Source IP 10.0.0.5. I froze. That was not a remote login. That was a local IP address. Elena, I breathed. The log shows the access came from the internal executive suite network. I was at home. They logged in from the office using your ID, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. That is identity theft. Capture it. Capture everything. I took a screenshot, then another. With every image, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. I was no longer a victim. I was a witness building a case. I was freezing my future with every pixel I saved. I am going back in, I said. Be careful, Elena warned. Do not let them see you smile. I hung up. I slipped the phone back into my clutch. I checked my reflection in the dark glass of the emergency door. I smoothed my hair. I practiced a soft, defeated expression. I needed them to think I was broken. I needed them to think I was just a woman taking a moment to cry in the hallway. I walked back toward the dining room. My face was a mask of gentle compliance, but in my pocket, I was carrying a digital bomb that could level the entire building. I needed air. The air conditioning inside was recycled and stale, heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and deceit. I slipped through the glass doors onto the terrace balcony. It was empty, save for a single figure standing in the shadows, nursing a tumbler of whiskey. Ms. Whitman. The name hit me like a splash of ice water. I stopped. I had not heard my maiden name spoken with that kind of weight in 10 years. I turned. Leaning against the stone railing, looking unbothered by the chilly Nashville night, was Caleb Hart. He was the CEO of Everglen Systems, Grant's sworn enemy in the logistics sector. He was the last person I expected to see at a Mercer victory dinner. Mr. Hart, I replied, straightening my spine. I assume you are lost. The vultures are feeding inside. I know where I am, Caleb said. He took a slow sip of his drink. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me like I was a balance sheet he was analyzing for value. Grant invited me. He wanted an audience. An audience for what? For the transition. Caleb said calmly. He wanted to show me that he is upgrading. New wife. New board members. Fresh start. It is a classic power move, but Grant always forgets one thing. I do not look at the paint job. I look at the engine. He stepped out of the shadows. He was older than Grant, sharper, with eyes that missed nothing. The engine is failing, Kara, he said, dropping the formalities. Mercer Dominion is paddling hard to stay afloat. Their last quarterly report was a work of fiction. I ran the numbers myself. They are bleeding cash in the logistics division. They are just moving debt around to hide the holes. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Why are you telling me this? Because when a ship sinks, the captain usually looks for someone else to hold the wheel, Caleb said. They are looking for a hand to hold the pen when the ink turns red. I assume that is what is in the leather folder on your table. He knew. He did not just guess. He knew the play because he knew the game. You are very observant, I said. Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, matte black business card. He slid it across the stone railing toward me. I am launching a green logistics division next month, he said. Sustainable supply chains, high growth. I need a chief financial officer who knows how to restructure complex debt without creative accounting. I looked at the card. CFO. It was a lifeline. I cannot work for you, I said, my voice low. If I sign those papers inside, I am barred from the industry for 10 years. Then do not sign them, Caleb said simply. But there is a condition. I run a clean shop. I need a CFO who is not under indictment. If you come to me, you come clean, no baggage, no legal clouds. I stared at him. I realized what he was doing. This was not charity. This was leverage. By offering me a job now, at this exact minute, he was giving me a timestamp. If I accepted, I was no longer the desperate, unemployed ex-wife with a motive to sabotage Grant. I was a recruited executive with a better offer. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "I am not helping you," Caleb corrected. "I am acquiring an asset that my competitor is foolish enough to discard. And frankly, I enjoy ruining Grant's evening." He checked his watch. "I will have my IT director draft an affidavit tonight stating that we have had no prior communication before this moment. Grant will try to claim you were a mole. We will cut that argument off at the knees." My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a phantom vibration, but it reminded me of the war I was fighting. I quickly typed a message to Elena. "I have a witness. Caleb Hart is on the balcony. He just offered me a job." I looked back at Caleb. "Grant invited you to watch me die socially." "He did." Caleb nodded. "He lacks imagination." "Thank you, Mr. Hart," I said. "Do not thank me yet," he said, turning back to the city skyline. "Go back in there. If he wants a show, give him one. But this time, you write the script." I took the card and slipped it into my pocket, right next to the phone containing the evidence of my own framing. I took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clarifying. I was not just a victim anymore. I was a woman with options. I turned and walked back toward the glass doors. Grant wanted a stage. I was about to turn it into a courtroom. I walked back into the private dining room, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The air was thick with a silence that felt rehearsed. Victor Mercer did not wait for me to sit. He uncapped the heavy Mont Blanc pen and slammed it down on the leather folder with a dull thud that echoed off the mahogany walls. It was a performance of dominance. Behind me, I felt Grant step into my personal space, effectively blocking the path back to the terrace. They were physically corralling me. "The time for reading is over." "Kara," Victor growled, his face flushing a deep, unhealthy red. "Sign the papers. Now." I looked at my mother. I expected her to flinch at his tone. I expected her to defend her daughter. Instead, she straightened her pearls and looked past my shoulder, staring at a point on the wall. "Kara, please," my mother said, her voice shaking but her words lethal. "The family. We have discussed this. We have decided to stand with Grant. He is the future. You need to stop being selfish and just let go." It was a surgical strike. My own mother had just publicly disowned me to secure her financial lifeline. The pain was sharp, but it was cauterized instantly by the cold realization of what was happening next. "Sloane," Grant said softly. Sloane Parker stood up from her side chair and walked around the table. She smoothed her skirt and sat down in the empty seat directly to Grant's right. It was my seat. It was the seat of the CEO's wife. She did not look at me. She just picked up the linen napkin and placed it on her lap. The replacement was official. "I am not signing that acknowledgement," I said, my voice steady. "It is fraudulent." Grant let out a sigh that sounded terribly theatrical. He looked at his partners, shaking his head as if he were the long-suffering victim. "I really did not want to do this, Kara," Grant said, reaching into his inner jacket pocket. "I wanted to let you leave with dignity, but if you are going to play hardball..." He pulled out a folded sheet of paper and smoothed it onto the table for everyone to see. It was a printout of an email. "We found this on the server," Grant announced, his voice raising so the entire room could hear. "An email sent from your personal account to Everglen Systems. Attached were the proprietary algorithmic models for our new logistics hub. You were selling us out. Kara, that is why we are divorcing you. That is why we are stripping your assets." A gasp rippled through the room. The junior partners looked at me with genuine disgust. They had been primed for this reveal. This was Plan B. If I did not sign the voluntary confession, they would frame me for corporate espionage. I looked at the paper. It was a clumsy forgery. I did not panic. I did not scream. I let a small, dry laugh escape my lips. "You think this is funny," Victor demanded. "I think it is lazy," I replied. I leaned over the table, ignoring the hostile glares. "Grant, look at the timestamp on that email. Read it out loud." Grant hesitated. He looked down. "It says sent October 14th at 2:45 in the afternoon. What does it matter?" "October 14th, I repeated. "At 2:45 in the afternoon. I was on Delta Flight 404 from New York to Nashville. I have the boarding pass on my phone right now." "So," Grant scoffed, "billions of people have Wi-Fi on planes." "Not on that flight," I said, my eyes locking onto his. "The Wi-Fi system was down for the entire duration of the trip. I filed a complaint about it to get a refund of $12. "I have the receipt for the refund." "Grant, it confirms zero connectivity between 1 o'clock and 4:30, physically, digitally, and logically. I could not have sent that email." The room went deadly silent. Grant's jaw tightened. He looked at the paper, then at me. "Mr. Hart." I called out, turning my head slightly toward the balcony doors where Caleb had just entered the room. The crowd parted. Caleb Hart stood there, looking bored and dangerous. Grant's face drained of color. He had forgotten he had invited the wolf to the party. "Did you receive an email from me on October 14th, Mr. Hart?" I asked. Caleb smirked. "I did not, and frankly, Grant, if I wanted your algorithms, I would not buy them. I would just wait for you to go bankrupt and pick them up at the liquidation auction." "This is," Grant stammered, looking at the fake email in his hand as if it were burning him. "There must be a mistake with the server clock." "Or maybe," I said, lowering my voice so that everyone had to lean in to hear me, "you are just bad at framing people." I pointed to the ceiling corner. "There are 3 security cameras in this room. Grant, audio and video. They have been recording this entire performance. They recorded you handing me a fraudulent document. They recorded you producing a forged email. And they are recording you right now, realizing you have committed a felony in front of a dozen witnesses." Grant froze. He looked at the camera lens, terror flashing in his eyes. He was not afraid of losing his wife. He was afraid of evidence. I pulled my phone out of my clutch. I placed it face up on the table, right next to the damning leather folder. I opened my messaging app and typed a single line to Grant. Ding. His phone lit up on the table. He looked down. From Kara. "From now on, every text you send is evidence." "I am done eating," I said, standing up. "But please, do not let me ruin the party." I turned away from the table, intending to head straight for the main exit, but a hand shot out from the heavy velvet curtains near the service station. It gripped my wrist, not with aggression, but with a desperate, trembling intensity. I whipped around, ready to fight, but I found myself looking into the terrified eyes of Lila Mercer. Grant's younger sister had spent her entire life blending into the wallpaper. She was the silent Mercer, the one who nodded at board meetings and never spoke. Now, she pulled me into a narrow alcove used by the waitstaff, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "You cannot leave yet," Lila whispered, her voice cracking. "If you walk out without the full picture, they will win." "I am done with your family, Lila," I said, trying to pull my arm free. "No, you do not understand," Lila stammered, her eyes darting toward the dining room to ensure we were unseen. "Sloan, she is not just a girlfriend. She is a structure. She is the pipeline." I stopped struggling. "What are you talking about? Sloan was brought in 6 months ago," Lila said. the words spilling out of her as if she had been holding them in for years. Grant did not meet her at a bar. Victor hired her. She is on the payroll of a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. They need her to marry Grant, so she has spousal privilege. She is there to sign the papers that you are too smart to sign. I stared at her. Sloane was not a homewrecker. She was a laundromat for dirty money. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Lila looked down at her hands. They were shaking violently. Because of Plan C, she admitted, a tear escaping her eye. If you do not sign and if they cannot frame you, they have to blame someone for the IT breaches. They cannot pin it on Victor or Grant. They need a family member with access but no power. They are going to say it was me, Kara. They are drafting the press release right now saying I hacked the system due to mental instability. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They were willing to sacrifice their own daughter to keep the stock price stable. Lila shoved a crumpled cocktail napkin into my hand. It was warm from being clutched in her palm. Take it, she hissed. I cannot use it. I am too weak, but you can burn them down with this. I unfolded the napkin. Scrawled in smeared eyeliner were two names, Blue Harbor Ventures and Nolan Price. My mind raced. Blue Harbor was a name I had seen on vague invoices, usually dismissed as consulting fees. But Nolan Price, I knew that name. He was the new head of IT, a man who was never listed on the company directory. He worked out of a windowless office in the basement that required biometric access. I had always assumed he was running security. Now I realized he was running the back end of a fraud ring. He held the admin keys. Nolan has the master ledger, Lila whispered. He is the only one who knows where the money actually went. I immediately pulled out my phone. I typed the names into the secure chat with Elena. Target Blue Harbor Ventures, keyholder Nolan Price. Do not ask for my source. Elena's reply was instantaneous. Received. I am initiating a preservation order on Price's employment records. We are creating a chain of custody. Keep your face blank. I looked back at Lila. She seemed smaller now, diminished by the act of betrayal. One more thing, Lila said, grabbing my arm again. Your mother. I stiffened. I do not want to hear about her. She is not doing this because she hates you, Lila said, her voice dropping so low I had to lean in. Grant called in the loan. The money he gave your father, it had a clause. Immediate repayment upon demand. If she did not side with him tonight, he was going to seize their house tomorrow morning. She is not cruel, Kara. She is terrified. The anger I felt toward my mother did not vanish, but it shifted. It cooled into something harder. She was a victim of the same monster, but unlike me, she had chosen submission. I would not make that mistake. I would not cry for the betrayal. I would use the very system they worshipped to dismantle them brick by brick. Go, I told Lila, before they see you. Destroy him, Lila said, her voice suddenly steady. She slipped back through the curtains and vanished into the bustling restaurant. I stood alone in the shadows, clutching the napkin. It was just a scrap of paper, but in my hand, it felt heavier than a gun. I had the name, I had the account, and I had the motive. I smoothed my dress, checked my reflection in the darkened window, and prepared to step back onto the stage. I sat back down at the table, placing my phone flat on the white tablecloth next to my untouched wine glass. To the room, I looked like a defeated woman checking her messages. In reality, I was conducting a forensic audit in real time. I used my biometric thumbprint to bypass the standard login screen of the company portal, diving deep into the server logs. I filtered the access history by user ID. There it was, multiple logins under the name Kadir Whitman over the last 3 weeks. I expanded the metadata. The IP addresses did not belong to my home Wi-Fi or any public network. They originated from the executive subnet, specifically the hardline connections in the C-suite offices. Elena, I dictated softly into the voice-to-text feature. keeping the phone angled away from Grant. I am seeing logins from the internal subnet, specifically Node 4. That is Grant's office. A notification banner slid down from the top of my screen. It was Elena. Preservation letter sent to the brass and ash management and the security vendor. I have demanded they lock the footage from 6 p.m. onwards. If they delete a single frame, they are accessories to a felony. I casually opened the leather folder again, flipping to the appendix page I had photographed earlier. I zoomed in on the photo on my screen, comparing the transaction codes to a cached version of the quarterly budget I had saved on my cloud drive. The numbers aligned with a terrifying precision. The $1.2 million operating shortfall they had blamed on rising fuel costs was not a loss. It was a transfer. It matched the exact total of the vendor payments they were trying to force me to sign for. I switched apps to the browser. I had the official whistleblower complaint form for the Securities and Exchange Commission already loaded. It was 80% filled out. I just needed to attach the evidence. "You are pushing your luck, Kara." Grant's voice buzzed from my phone. I looked at him across the table. He was holding his device below the table rim, his knuckles white. I opened our chat thread. "Grant, if you do not sign that paper in the next 5 minutes, I will bury you. I have photos of you meeting with competitors." I did not flinch. I did not argue. I needed him to keep talking. I needed him to be specific. "Me." "What competitors?" "Grant." "And why are you threatening me if the document is just a formality?" "Grant, do not play dumb. You are costing me time. The transfer is queued. Sign it or I release the photos." Perfect. He had just admitted the transfer was queued and dependent on my signature. He had established a timeline and a motive for extortion. $1.2 million, I said. Not loud enough for the room, but loud enough for the head of the table. "That is a lot of money to lose on fuel. Grant." Sloane Parker, who had been sipping her champagne with a bored expression, suddenly froze. Her eyes darted to Grant. "It went to Blue Harbor Ventures, didn't it?" I asked, watching her face. Sloane's glass clinked against her teeth. The color drained from her cheeks. She knew the name. She wasn't just a figurehead. She knew exactly where the bodies were buried. Her reaction was the final confirmation I needed. It was not a theory anymore. It was a conspiracy. My phone vibrated with a new message. It was from Caleb Hart. "Caleb, official offer letter sent to your personal email at 9:45 p.m. Compensation package includes full legal indemnity. Welcome aboard, Kara." I smiled. That timestamp was my shield. If Grant tried to claim I was a disgruntled, unemployed ex-wife seeking revenge, I could prove I was already employed by a competitor before I filed the complaint. My motive was clean. Victor Mercer noticed my smile. It unnerved him. He signaled to the large man standing near the entrance, the restaurant's private security. "Get her out of here," Victor muttered, gesturing toward me. I saw the security guard step forward. I immediately stood up, but I did not move toward the door. I took a step back, positioning myself directly under the main chandelier, exactly where the 2 ceiling cameras had overlapping fields of view. "Are you removing me, Victor?" I asked, raising my voice slightly to ensure the audio pickup was clear. "Are you ordering security to physically remove me because I refused to sign a fraudulent financial statement?" The guard hesitated. He looked at the cameras, then at Victor. He knew what duress looked like in a courtroom, and he did not want to be the one applying the force. "Sit down, Kara," Victor hissed, realizing his mistake. "No," I said. "I think I will stand." Grant's phone pinged again. He looked at it, and his face twisted in panic. He realized I wasn't just texting him. I was forwarding his threats to a secure server. "Kara, wait," Grant stammered, standing up. We can discuss the settlement amount. Maybe the fund can be larger." "It is too late for negotiations, Grant," I said. I looked down at my screen. The SEC complaint form was ready. The attachments were loaded: the forged email, The login logs, the transaction codes, the photo of the appendix, and Grant's threatening texts. The waiter arrived with a tray of fresh champagne bottles, ready for the toast. "To the future of Mercer Dominion," one of the oblivious partners shouted, raising his glass. "Yes," I whispered to myself. "To the future." I pressed submit. A loading circle spun for 2 seconds. Then, a green checkmark appeared. Submission received, case number 8492. I looked up at Grant, who was raising his glass with a trembling hand. The party was just starting, but as far as the federal government was concerned, the trial had just begun. Grant was a man who believed that if he stuck to the script, the audience would eventually applaud. Despite the fact that I had just accused him of fraud and the room was thick with tension, he checked his watch. It was exactly 9:30. He grabbed the microphone from the stand near the band and forced a wide, manic smile. "Everyone, please," Grant announced, his voice booming over the speakers. He reached out and pulled Sloane roughly toward the center of the room. She looked pale, her eyes darting between me and the door, but she let him drag her. "I know emotions are high, but tonight is about the future. Sloane, you have been my rock." He dropped to one knee. It was a grotesque display of performance art. He produced a ring box, snapping it open to reveal a diamond that was undoubtedly purchased with company funds. "Will you marry me?" Grant asked. Before Sloane could answer, a sob broke out from the corner table. My mother stood up, clapping her hands together, tears streaming down her face. It was a perfect, rehearsed reaction. "Oh, say yes," my mother cried out, turning to look at the other guests with a pleading expression. "Isn't it beautiful, Kara? Please do not ruin this moment for them. Let them be happy." She was weaponizing the crowd against me. She wanted to paint me as the bitter, jealous ex-wife destroying a romantic moment. The guests murmured, shifting their gaze to me with judgment. They saw a villain. I did not scream. I did not storm the stage. I simply walked forward, picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, and held it high. "Cheers," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. Grant froze on one knee. "Congratulations," I continued, looking directly at Sloane. "To a marriage fully sponsored by Blue Harbor Ventures." Sloane stopped breathing. The ring box in Grant's hand shook. "I am sure the wedding will be lovely," I added, stepping closer until I was standing right over them. "Especially since it is being paid for with the $1,240,000 missing from the maintenance fund. Isn't that right, Sloane? That is the exact amount you transferred last Thursday." The number hung in the air like smoke. Sloane pulled her hand back as if the ring were burning her skin. She knew that number. She had typed it herself. "Security." Victor Mercer roared, jumping up from his chair. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "Get her out. She is trespassing." 2 guards started toward me. I did not flinch. I did not retreat. I pointed to the ceiling. "Touch me," I said, my voice cold and hard. "And you add assault to a federal racketeering investigation. The cameras are rolling. Gentlemen, do you really want to go to prison for Victor Mercer?" The guards stopped. They looked at Victor, then at me, and stepped back. They were not paid enough to fight the FBI. Caleb Hart moved from the balcony, stepping silently into the light to stand just behind my right shoulder. He did not say a word. He just crossed his arms. His presence was a signal. The junior partners at the table saw him the CEO of their biggest rival standing as a witness for the defense, and the panic set in. I saw phones light up under the table. They were not recording videos anymore. They were deleting messages. Suddenly, the double doors at the entrance crashed open. But it was not the police. It was Lila. She stood in the doorway, her chest heaving, her face white with terror. She looked at Grant, then at Victor, and finally screamed the words that ended the party. "They are in the lobby." "Who?" Victor demanded, his voice cracking. The feds! Lila screamed. A heavy, rhythmic thudding of boots on the hardwood floor followed her announcement. The service doors and the main entrance burst open simultaneously. A dozen agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI and IRS criminal investigations swarmed the room. "Nobody move," a lead agent shouted, holding up a badge. "Hands where we can see them. We have a warrant to seize all electronic devices and physical records." The room dissolved into chaos. Waiters dropped trays. Partners tried to slide phones into ice buckets. Victor collapsed into his chair, clutching his chest. But Grant did not look at the agents. He looked at me. He scrambled up from his knees, abandoning Sloane and the ring on the floor. He rushed toward me, ignoring the agents yelling at him to freeze. He grabbed my shoulders, his eyes wild with desperation. "Kara, wait!" Grant begged, his voice high and frantic. "We can fix this. I will give you half. No, I will give you everything. $3 million. Cash. Just tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you approved the transfers." I looked at his hands gripping my dress. He was bribing a witness in front of 20 federal agents. He was so used to buying his way out of trouble that he did not realize he was just digging his grave deeper. "Did you hear that?" I asked, looking past him at the agent approaching us with handcuffs. "He just offered me $3 million to perjure myself." Grant's hands fell away from me. He turned around to see the agent standing there, cuffs ready. The script was gone. The audience was watching, but nobody was clapping. Elena Reyes cut through the chaos like a blade. She walked straight to the lead FBI agent, ignoring the shouting men and the weeping mother, and slapped a thick file onto the table. It landed right next to the unsigned liability agreement. "This is a pre-filed whistleblower complaint, submitted at 9:41 this evening," Elena announced, her voice calm and authoritative. "My client, Kara Whitman, is cooperating fully under a conditional immunity agreement. She is not a suspect. Agent. She is your star witness." The agent picked up the file. He glanced at the tablet in his hand, then at the leather folder Grant had tried to force me to sign. "The timestamps match," the agent said, looking at Grant. "The attempt to coerce a signature happened exactly when the unauthorized transfers were flagged." Sloane Parker, who had been trembling near the centerpiece, suddenly let out a strangled cry. She looked at the agents, then at Grant, and her self-preservation instinct kicked in with violent force. "I did not know it was illegal," Sloane screamed, tears streaking her makeup. "Grant told me it was just asset reallocation. He said I had to use the Blue Harbor account because Kara was too slow. I only clicked the button because he told me to." "Shut up, you idiot!" Victor roared. "It wasn't me," Victor shouted, turning to the agents, sweat pouring down his face. "It was our IT director, Nolan Price. He went rogue. He set this all up to frame us. Actually, Dad." A quiet voice cut through the noise. Lila stepped forward from the doorway. She held up her phone. She pressed play. The audio was grainy, but the voice was unmistakably Victor's. It was a recording from the security camera in his private study. "Make it look like Kara signed from home," Victor's voice rasped from the speaker. "Use her old credentials. If the audit comes, we blame the ex-wife. She is expendable." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Victor slumped in his chair, his face turning the color of ash. He looked at his daughter, realizing that the quietest person in the room had just delivered the execution blow. Grant looked at his father, then at the agents closing in. His facade shattered. He scrambled toward me, his hands reaching out, but he stopped when he saw the look in my eyes. "Kara." "Please," Grant begged, his voice cracking. "I can fix this. I will testify against him. I will say it was all Victor's idea, just tell them we are still partners. Tell them we can work this out." The crowd of partners and socialites watched in horror. The man who had played the perfect CEO was now trying to sell his own father to save his skin. I looked at him. I felt nothing. No anger. No love. Just a cold, clinical detachment. "You did not replace me, Grant," I said softly. "You just borrowed my name to hide your crime. But you forgot one thing. I own my name." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. It was a sharp, final sound. 2 agents pulled Grant's hands behind his back. Another pair hauled Victor out of his chair. The perfect family was being dismantled in real time, marched out past the dessert cart. I turned to my mother. She was sitting alone at the table, staring at the empty chairs where the power players had sat moments ago. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a terrified realization that the checks were about to stop clearing. "Kara," she whispered, "we are family." I did not lose my family tonight. "Mom," I said, picking up my clutch. "I lost it the moment you agreed to replace me for a loan payoff." I looked down at the Mont Blanc pen lying on the table. I picked it up, held it for a second, and then dropped it onto the unsigned paper. It rolled off the table and hit the floor. I turned my back on them. I walked through the brass and ash, past the stunned onlookers, and out into the cool night air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email from Caleb Hart. Subject: "Welcome to the team. Contract attached." I took a deep breath. The air tasted like freedom. I had walked into that restaurant as a discarded wife, slated for destruction. I was walking out as a CFO, a whistleblower, and a woman who had rewritten the ending. Then I replaced myself by becoming the one they could never erase. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope you enjoyed Kara's journey from betrayal to absolute victory. Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from right now. I love reading about where our community is listening from and hearing your thoughts on the story. If you want more stories like this, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Mia Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next one.